In this video, we will show you how to replace your rear axle seal on this Ford Ranger. This will be mounted inside your rear differential tube behind your rear brakes. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely raise and support the vehicle. We'll remove the center cover here. Set that aside. Remove all of your lug nuts using a 19mm. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, the next thing that we need to do is push back our caliper piston. That's located in this area here. We'll carefully use a pry bar and start pressing this back. We want to get some movement. Once you have a little bit of movement from this, you can continue. Let's make sure this can move now. Now that you've pushed back the caliper piston, use a 10mm to remove each one of your two 10mm head caliper slider pins. The top one will have a rubber vibration dampener. This one pretty much just loosens up to this point. We'll continue on. Go ahead and remove each one of those two caliper slider bolts. We'll set those aside. Along the outside here, on the outboard pad, you will have this clip. Carefully depress it, use your small pry bar, and pry this out of place, rolling it away from the bottom up. If the pads are stuck in the bracket, carefully pry them out of place. Now, once you have the caliper removed, the next thing that you need to do is inspect each one of your two brake pads. Assuming those look good, we'll pay attention to this area here on the caliper itself, double check to make sure it's not leaking any fluid. Now we'll just hang this up here, putting no pressure on the flex hose. Take hold of the rotor and attempt to remove it from the vehicle. If it feels as though it's stuck in place, you're going to have to use one of your lug nuts and start it in position. Continue on, carefully using a hammer will cause some vibration and break this free. After doing so, remove the lug nut and your rotor from the vehicle. Just want to give this a quick inspection and set it aside. It's a good idea to at least break the fill plug free before you drain your differential. Typically, you'll be using a 3/8 drive ratchet for this. It looks like somebody put a different plug on our application. I'll be using a 22mm. Let's make our way towards the pumpkin here on the rear differential. Pay attention to your ABS wire. We're going to dismount that from the bracket here. You can use a trim tool or a small prying device. Just give that a quick inspection. We'll set it aside so we're sure we will not cause any damage to this. Remove these two 10mm headed mounting nuts so you can separate the emergency brake cable from your rear differential cover mounting studs. Slide that off of there. Before you remove the diff pan cover, it's important to make sure you clean up the debris. Let's get this ABS wire off of here. Continue on to removing all 10 pieces of your mounting hardware. You'll find that there are 3 studs on here that have threading on the end. It's important to make sure you know exactly where those go so you can reinstall them in the same area. As you remove each of these pieces of hardware, make sure that you inspect them and replace them as necessary. When I'm doing something like this, I always like to leave one bolt in there, a couple threads. At this point, we'll continue on removing each one of these, allowing the fluid to drain into our collection receptacle. It's common for the differential pan to be stuck in place with a gasket maker. Go ahead and pry that out of place with a small prying device. You can use a pry bar, trim tool, whatever you might happen to have. Let's get this off of here. Carefully remove the pan. We'll just give this a quick inspection on the inside. You want to double check to make sure it doesn't look like it's rotted in any way. If it looks like it's rotted, you have to go ahead and replace this pan. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and clean this up and set it aside. With the pan out of the way, we have a clear view of the inside of your rear differential. You have all of the gears. What we need to do is remove this pin from the area. Have your vehicle in neutral. Make sure that it's secure and it cannot roll away. Go ahead and turn your drive shaft as needed. We're going to be looking for a bolt that comes straight through this area. We'll have to turn this a complete 180 degrees here. There's my 8mm headed bolt. Now at this point, I typically like to have it coming down at an angle. We're going to carefully start removing this bolt, but that bolt comes all the way through here and it holds this pin in place. When you do remove that bolt, make sure you're holding this pin so it does not fall out and get damaged or hurt you. To break this free, use an 8mm headed wrench and a rubber mallet. Let's give this a quick inspection. Make sure it's not rotted or damaged in any way. If you do see rust or rot, typically it's because there's moisture inside of your differential pan. Now, the next thing that we're going to have to do is make our way towards the outside of the differential, where the brake rotor would have been. We're going to push the axle inboard. When doing so, pay attention right along here. There's a locking clip. Once you have the axle pressed in, it should fall out down into the bottom of the differential. Use our pick, we can break this free here. There's the clip right there. At this point, if you're doing both sides of the vehicle, you want to do the same thing to the other axle. Out here, we'll take hold of the axle and carefully start pulling it away from the vehicle. Be careful, it's extremely heavy, and there's also the possibility fluid will come out. You can see the seal back there now. What a mess. Now that we have the axle out of there, it's important to make sure you inspect this area. You can tell it's nice and shiny. Close to the ABS ring is where the seal will ride, and down along here is where the bearings will ride. Make sure it's a smooth surface and it's not damaged in any way. Assuming that looks good, you can go ahead and set this aside. Before we start removing the seal, pay attention to this entire area. Any of this debris could potentially make its way on the inside here, and clearly we do not want that, especially if you aren't thinking of replacing the bearing. I rolled up a rag. We'll stick it in there just to protect this area from any debris. Continue on with a wire brush or whatever you might happen to have. Remove as much of this area as possible. Once it's nice and clean, we can continue on with carefully removing the seal from the differential tube. Now we can start removing the seal from the area. You can either use a seal removal tool or you can use a long pry bar. I'll be using the seal puller. When doing so, we'll carefully make our way inside of this area, being extremely careful not to damage the differential tube in any way. Once you start prying this out, be careful it doesn't fly out and hit you in the face. Just have to work our way around. And there it is, friend. Let's clean this up. Let's install our seal. Along the back side of the seal, you're going to find that you have a small spring that goes around the rubber seal portion. We want to make sure that we hold that in place. Just use a tiny bit of petroleum jelly in this area. Just go right around. We want to be careful not to get any of this lubricant on the outer portion because we will be using some gasket maker. When you're using gasket maker, you want to make sure that it is oil resistant. It's extremely important. We'll take some of this, make a small dab here, and then just make a nice bead all the way around. Now, while putting this in place, we'll have the springed area facing inboard towards that bearing. Let's try to drive this in as straight as possible. When pressing this in, we only want to go into the end of the tube. We don't need to go any further than that. Let's clean and inspect this area here. Start sliding the axle in here. What you'll find is you make it a little bit in, and then eventually you'll have to start tipping it a little bit, because at the far end, we need to angle it up just enough that it'll slide into its housing in there. Give it this a little wiggle. We don't want to twist too far because we don't want to dislodge any of the gears inside of the differential pumpkin. Once you have this pressed in as far as possible, let's pause out here and make our way back towards that pumpkin. Now back in the center here, it's extremely important to make sure that you do not forget to reinstall this locking clip. Otherwise, you might have an issue where your axle pulls out of the differential. Once you do have that pressed in, you want to continue on by pressing the axle outward towards the outboard side of the vehicle here. You can either reach on the inside and press it, or make your way towards the outside there and give it a little tug. Now, before we continue putting this in, it's important to mention, if you are planning on doing the same thing on the other side of the vehicle, go ahead and do that now. Now it's time for our pin. You'll find on one side of it, it does have the hole for your mounting bolt. Before you continue putting it together, make sure you clean the threaded area, give it a thorough inspection, and use a little bit of either yellow or blue thread locker. Never red thread locker on this application. Start sliding this in there, aligning our mounting bolt hole. Now we can torque this to 22 foot-pounds. You can either put your vehicle in park or hold the drive shaft from spinning. Double check to make sure everything is secured in this area. Once you've done so, protect this area with a rag of some sort, and we'll continue on cleaning the differential where the pan will go. This tucked in here. At this point, let's use a flat scraper, and we're going to remove as much debris as possible from this area, trying to prevent anything from making its way inside of the differential. Use some parts cleaner. We'll give this a quick wipe, double check. Once we're sure we have this area cleaned, we'll clean out the inside of the differential because there is typically a little bit of gear oil in here and possibly some debris. After that, clean up the pan and we'll get this back in place. Double check to make sure there is absolutely nothing inside of the differential that should not be there. Now we can clean up our differential cover. We want to make sure that we clean the inboard side and the mounting point here all the way around. As for the outside here, it's really just cosmetic, so that's up to you how much cleaning you want to do. Once you've cleaned the pan, continue on to cleaning the threads on each one of your mounting bolts and studs. After that, you want to make sure that you use some gasket maker on the mounting point of the pan where it will go up against the differential. Make sure you have the pan in the proper placement so that the bump out is where this gear is. Just get a couple bolts in here. Once you have all of them started in there, continue on to tightening them and then torque those to 33 foot-pounds. For good measure, you can go around one more time. Let's get this ABS wire on the stud here. Double check to make sure that's secure so it doesn't get tangled on anything. We have our emergency brake cable bracket. Continue on with your two 10mm headed nuts. Start them on, snug them up, torque these to 80 inch-pounds. Now the next thing we want to do is clean our mating surface on the axle and on the backside of the rotor. We'll use a disc for this. We want to make sure that we have well-ventilated area. Once you've done that, the next thing you'd want to do is clean the inside of the rotor mating surface. I'm replacing this rotor anyways, so I'll just go ahead and set this one aside. A little bit of anti-seize. Whether you're replacing the rotor or not, you definitely want to clean the braking surface here. Just give that a quick wipe. Temporarily install one of your lug nuts. Once you've done so, you're going to make your way to the back side of the backing plate. Along the front, you'll find an adjustment port. Make your way inside there. Adjust up the emergency brake shoes until they're closely touching the rotor. After that, back them off just a little bit. When we're putting this together, I always like to take the brakes apart completely, clean and inspect everything. That way there we know for sure it will function properly. Now let's pay attention to the caliper itself. We'll remove the brake pads, clean and inspect everything, including those slider pins with their corresponding boots. Small prying device for this. Just a quick inspection of those pads. I am replacing the pads, so I'm not super worried about them, but if you're not replacing them, you definitely want to give them a close inspection and make sure they're not damaged in any way. Once you have those slider pins out of there, you want to inspect the shafted area, make sure it doesn't look like it's rotted in any way. Anything that could cause a restriction could cause a braking problem. If it does look like it needs to be cleaned up, go ahead and take that to a wire wheel if needed. Do the same to the other one here. Just press it up and out. Now, you don't necessarily have to remove the caliper slider boots. Typically, you can just twist up a rag, slide it up through there. Once you clean out the insides, just go ahead and give it a little squeeze. Make sure it's soft and pliable and it's not torn, worn, or damaged. Confirm one side and then do the exact same thing to the other. When cleaning your slider pins, not only is it important to clean the shafted area, but you want to clean each one of these two grooves, one on each side. Once you have that nice and clean, let's continue on with a little bit of lubricant. I'll use that lubricant right inside the boot here. I'm trying to make my way right along this area on the inside because that's essentially where the pin will be dragging against. Pretty much everywhere else is just a dust protection. Make sure we get onto the very end of each side of this. Carefully start putting this pin in here. Just have to work it around. I've got it in the groove now, but we have to continue pushing it down. Careful not to tear that boot. I'll slide it right down in there. There we are. Once you have the boot inside each one of these two grooves, you just want to work it around. We're trying to work in that grease. Do the same to the other. Pay attention to your caliper piston. We want to ensure that this is pressed inside of the caliper as far as possible. Once you press it in, double check to make sure you don't see any fluid. We'll use a caliper compression tool here. Just slide it right into that piston along the back side of the caliper, and now we'll squeeze this together. Add a little bit of high temperature caliper lubricant along each one of these three areas. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. The inboard pad has the three hooks on the inside there. Those will slide right into that caliper piston. The outboard pad has these two hooks here, and we have that locking clip. You want to make sure you have the proper pad. If it's for the other side of the vehicle, it's going to be on the opposite side of this pad. Double check to make sure it's completely seated. You might just have to move it around a little bit here. Once you've done so, we'll slide it into position over the rotor. Before we put this in position, let's take that upper slider pin with the vibration dampener. We want to just slide it in and through the slider here. We'll take this, slide it into position. Once you've done that, you can roll the lower area into position as well and put in that slider pin. Start both of these in. Just bottom these out by hand. For the upper one with the vibration dampener, clearly it's a little bit difficult to torque, but the torque for these is 18 foot-pounds. Make your way back to the rear differential. Along the front is where that fill plug hole is. We want to make sure that we top this off with the manufacturer's specified fluid. On our particular application, it requires 80/90 gear oil. There we are. At this point, we added 3 pints of 80/90 gear oil to the differential. You can see that we have a slow trickle of fluid coming out of here. We'll wait till this turns into a drip and then close off the differential. Make sure that's nice and snug. Clean your mess. Let's get this lug nut off of here. At this point, we'll continue on with reinstalling our wheel. Start on all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. Bottom them out. We'll get the wheel back on the ground, and we can torque these lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. We got the wheel on the ground. Let's torque these in a crisscross manner. Let's go around one more time. Torqued. Let's get our center cover on here. Okay, friend, we've got our vehicle back together. At this point, there's something that's very important to mention. You will have to tip the differential. What I mean by that is since we had this side apart, we want to make sure that we have the differential full of fluid as we do. Go over to the other side of the vehicle and jack up that differential so it's sitting at an angle. That will make the fluid make its way down to the bearing and the seal area. Once you've let it sit like that for approximately 5 minutes, go ahead and level out the differential, tip it in the opposite direction. After you've waited in that direction, continue on to topping off the fluid one last time. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.